Our original intention was to go to the zoo in Bismarck, but it's pouring down rain, so we leave Bismarck, drive to Fort Mandan, then go over to the Knife River Indian villages, drive across North Dakota on small roads, take the Enchanted Highway, then head to Dickinson, where we check into our hotel, go over to Madora, where we're going to try and see the musical and eat, and then back to Dickinson for the night. As we leave Bismarck in the morning, it starts raining, and it'll be raining the entire day almost. We'd not originally intended to go to the North Dakota Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center, but we see it on the way out to Knife River and decide to look and see what it has, and it was really a good stop. Here we'll explore mainly the Lewis and Clark expedition. Lewis and Clark were leading a military expedition, and they had 31 other people with them, including 3 scientists and artists. First, we have Prince Maximilian of Weed. He was a naturalist. Then we had Carl Bodmer, who was an artist. And lastly, we had David Griedroff, who was a taxidermist. We also brought along a Newfoundland retriever, Seaman. On May 1st, 1804, they left with a 55-foot keelboat. Clark stayed on the boat mainly, and Lewis explored on land a whole lot. In the winter of 1804, they arrived at Mandan. They had traveled over 600 miles, and these were the first Indian villages they had seen. The Hidatsa and the Mandan Indians had several villages along this area of the Missouri River. This is a painting of a typical village that they would have had. These were the Northern Plains Indians, and they built a fort here. This is where they first bump into Toussaint Bircheneau and his wife, Sakagewa. Or is that really her name?
Her name is Sakagewa. That's closest to how they phonetically recorded it.
Sakagewa. Several months later, they leave Fort Mandan, and they'll spend their next winter in the Pacific. Fort Mandan is important because this is where Lewis wrote most of the expedition report. This is where they did much of the ethnographic work. This is where they had a positive relation with the Indians, and this is where they picked up Sakagewa. And now let's go to Fort Mandan on the Missouri River. It is several miles from the visitor center, and there's a huge statue of Seaman. This is where Fort Mandan was, and these are the 5 villages. We'll go up to the Knife River villages in our next part of our trip. And now let's go explore Fort Mandan, at least this reconstruction.
Right to say that,
here we see the 2-story barracks where the main part of the party stayed. Moving around to the end, this is where the storage rooms were. Then the officers' quarters, the guides' quarters, the watch quarters.
He was kind of a romantic in some ways.
And obviously this is the gate. This is probably what it looked like during the winter. It was shaped like a triangle, and let's explore each of the areas. The section on the right was where the main party stayed. Each one of the rooms here is decorated as it might have been for various functions. And here's a recreation of one of the infantry soldiers. At the point was where they stored their goods. Pantry for fresh foods that they would have collected, and also their rum, and then a place to store their other goods they collected along the way. Much of this was sent back after the first winter. And these white boxes, this is gifts to give to the Indians. Each one was given to a different village. Here you can see some of the contents of those packages that were given out. American flags, medals of freedom, and other trinkets. Moving on around, we come to the officers' quarters, and this is where Lewis and Clark and their slave stayed. Next up is where the guides and other people like that stay. Next we come to the watch room where the sergeant at arms was quartered and where they kept most of the weapons. Well, actually, on the top end of the V is the blacksmith shop. This might have been one of the most important places for them, for the Indians brought in many of their things they had, and the blacksmiths fixed them, and thus they had a lot of contact with the Native Americans here. Now let's head to the Knife River National Historic Site. We will first visit the visitor center, and then we'll drive up the highway and park closer to the Indian village and try to walk to it in the rain. This is what it looked like in this area. We're on the Knife River, and this is what the local native villages look like during the summer. This is called the Knife River because there's a lot of flints along here, and they use this to make many different tools which they will then trade over a long period of time along with beadwork. As Northern Plains Indians, they did use the bison quite heavily.
Well, this is a main significance to this park is the example of the Northern Plains Indian cultures. There are 560 recognized tribes, and the Knife River Indian Villages focuses mostly on the Hidatsa, but we also associate with the Rikara and the Mandan, and by extension we also cover the Lewis and Clark. This is where the core discovery picked up, as we call the Charbonneau family.
And now let's go out and look at the Earth Lodge. They were 40 feet across, could house up to 20 family members, a couple of horses, and a few dogs. These were owned and mainly built by the women. And this is what it looked like on the inside with the entrance to the bottom. The men would come in and put up the main post and the post around the side, and the women did all the rest of the work. It took about 300 logs in 7 to 9 days, although the Park Service took 9 months.
So if you were a kid, you would get a bison robe and sleep on the floor. But when you get a little bit older, then you would be sleeping on one of these kinds of beds, and you were probably sleeping next to a sibling if you were a teenager. Then when you got married is when you got the real upgrade. Then you would get this nice canopy bed right here, and the cover itself was used for just keeping in warmth, and it was also storage for a teepee cover. So it had multiple purposes. But that wasn't the best bed in the whole Earth Lodge. The best bed was actually right here. This is called your tuka. In the daytime, it is your couch, and at night it is the best place to sleep because you're right next to the fire. So you're going to be nice and warm. So this is where the elders got to sleep because it was the best bed in the Earth Lodge. Now this was also your storytelling station. Exploit row, and it tells the exploits of a man named Forebears. He was a great Mandan chief and he was highly respected, and he had a lot of friends that he gave. So if you look at the top left, you can see the dash is there and then the red figure in the middle. That's when Forebears earned his name. So there's a great battle between tribes. The Forebear side had to retreat. When Forebear Forbears himself refused, and like in the picture, he grabbed his spear and he ran at the enemy by himself. And seeing a single man charging at about 60 or so people, armed only with a spear, his enemies thought, what kind of power does he have? What is he going to do to us? So in doing this, he scared away 60 horses, because they said he rushed with the power of 4 bears. So that's how he got his name, Forbears. Which I think is really cool. Hearing the story, it's going to be dinner time. So you're going to want to dip into your food stash. And that is this hole in the ground right over here. It's called your cache pit, and you can go over and inspect it closer if you would like. So your cache pit is where you put your storage for your food, your corn, squash, and beans. And the stick that's coming out of it is your ladder to get up and down. Now you'd have 3 or 4 of those in or around the earth lodge, just in case one collapsed, then you still have food available to you. So that's one form of storage in the earth lodge. Another form of storage is the things hanging from the ceiling. Those are called parflesh. Parflesh are your hanging clothes closets. Now the mice, they are the unwanted animals in the earth lodge. The wanted animals in here, those are going to be your dogs. Your dogs are going to be on the other side of this road near the entrance, so they would be an alarm system of sorts. And then you would also...
that one.
That's okay.
Lick them to death, huh?
She'll lick them to death. Yeah, you're right.
Those are great. But you would also have your horses in here. So your horses would be kept right over here. You see the saddles right over in the stable section. So in the summertime, you would have 1 horse inside almost all the time, and that is called your bison country horse. So you have the bison. So you didn't want being stolen, which is why you would keep it indoors. Now in the winter, when it was freezing cold outside, negative 40 degrees, and nobody should be out in that weather, then they would have all their horses inside. So you've got a handful of horses, some dogs, 15 to 20 people, and mice, and a fire going. I think you're going to be pretty cozy in the winter, but it might smell a little bit. Tobacco was the only item in the garden that the men were able to handle. The women were not allowed to touch it. It was a very specific role for the men. And only the older men were allowed to smoke it. So they knew, you might not know why, but they knew that if you ran a race against somebody who didn't smoke tobacco and you smoked, you were going to lose.
Here we have some of their farming implements, and this was a trading hub. People came for hundreds of miles around to trade with these Native Americans for beads and for various flint products. The villages here were established in 1600 and died out in 1837 when smallpox eliminated 95% of the people. Out of the 1,600 people in the villages, 31 survived. And because of their trading, they spread it over hundreds of square miles. Now we've reached the parking area near the village that Sakagewa was from. And so it's time to maybe head out and look at her village. It's here by the Knife River and is about 1,000 feet away from the parking lot. A very reasonable distance, even in the rain, and it might have looked like this. So I head out in the rain, but don't go far. I slip and get muddy from head to toe. So this is what it would have looked like if I had made it there. It's just an open field right now. Look from the air, you can see the remains of the housing. I come back and have to change all my clothes, and as it still rains, we head to the Enchanted Highway. Along the way, we see fields of wheat that are ready for harvest. Remember, North Dakota is wheat, South Dakota is corn. We also see a coal train going by that is taking coal to a power plant. Next, we happen to pass through Richardson and see the Abbey Church of St. Mary. It's a beautiful church, and stop for a few minutes to take a picture. When we travel, often things happen by accident, and we happen to get onto the Enchanted Highway. So we're going to drive down this and look at these sculptures on our way to Dickinson. They were made by Gary Griff of Regent, North Dakota, starting in 1989, and were used to draw people toward Regent, his town in the south. So we'll be stopping at each one and looking. First up is geese in flight. It's hard to tell the scale of this, but it's 30 or 40 feet high. Then we come to deer crossing, about 50 feet high. Next on down the road is grasshoppers, and you can see from this car how big these things are. That's about the scale of all the sculptures. Next up is Fisherman's Dream. Then comes Pheasants in the Prairie. Next, Teddy Roosevelt rides again. And then lastly, we see the Tin family. And there's Dad. Soon after the last sculpture, we're arriving in Regent, North Dakota. Now we drive to Dickinson, where we're going to be checking into our hotel when we arrive. That way we won't have to do it after we get back late at night. Soon it's time to head to Madora to eat and to see the show. Accidentally we get our GPS set to avoid highways, and so we end up on gravel roads that are probably for servicing oil wells. But there is beautiful country if we could just see it through the rain. This is part of the Badlands, and we'll be back in Badlands National Park later in the trip. Finally, we arrive in Madora and drive through it. It's about to shut down for the season, and there's not much here to see because of that. In fact, this is the last night of the show. We drive up into the hills and we get ready to eat our Pitchfork Fondue. You may be asking, what is a pitchfork fondue? Well, they take a pitchfork and they put steaks on it. And then they take large vats of oil and they basically fry them in it. Let's watch. Then they serve it to all the guests, and it's a wonderful meal. We still have an hour or two until the show's supposed to go on, so we look around the countryside some. It has quit raining for right now, but the wind is blowing very terribly and it's extremely cold. This is where the show is put on. And it's a variety show, and here's some of the costumes that are worn in past years. They're having a problem though. It's so cold and so bitterly cold, and it's going to rain, that they're afraid that the actors on stage will slip and fall and hurt themselves. So eventually they decide at the last moment to cancel it. And so we will not get to see the show. And it's time to head back to Dickens into our hotel room for the night. And this brings us to the end of day 5.